state senators, Claire Ayer being the other. And as people know, in the Senate you serve on 2 committees. So mornings I chair Natural Resources and Energy. Afternoon I serve on Senate Education. And I guess as we work today, we'll end up talking about, amongst other things we've wrapped up, things that are left unwrapped up at this point, special sessions underway, and look forward to our discussion.
Good morning. Hi, Diane Lanfer, representative from Addison 3, which is Ferrisburg, Virgins, Panton, Waltham, and Addison. I serve on House Appropriations Committee and have been in the legislature for 10 years now. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Fred Pacer. I'm in Bristol, Moncton, Lincoln, and Starksboro. Dave Sharp and I share the same district, and the committee I serve on is Ways and Means, the Tax Committee.
Morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Sharp. I'm in my 16th and final year in the legislature. I serve as chair of the Education Committee, and I'd be glad to talk about education things we did this year.
Okay, we are ready for questions. If you would stand up to a mic so that everybody can hear.
Hi, I'm Dinah Bain from Bridport, and I know there was a discussion that was going on when I came in, but could somebody say what is actually going on in the special legislative session at the moment?
So we passed an awful lot of bills this year and sent them to the governor's desk. The governor has vetoed more bills than any governor in the history of Vermont. We are working on 2 bills that are absolutely must pass in order for us to go forward and be able to pay our bills. And those are the budget and the tax bill. This governor has vetoed as many budgets as all the governors put together in the history of Vermont. He's vetoed 2 consecutive budget bills. And if we don't pass a budget, government shuts down on July 1st. We're going to work diligently to not have that happen. And so we're in a process of a sort of a negotiation. So this governor negotiates differently than the other 2 governors I've served under. I'm reminded of unemployment insurance when we were in the Great Recession. Unemployment insurance was bankrupt. We owed the federal government millions of dollars. And Speaker Shap Smith asked me to negotiate on the part of the House with the Douglas administration. And we sat down and we had a very difficult, fruitless negotiation in the first year of the biennium, and consequently decided to put together a study committee formed of Republicans and Democrats and others over the summer, worked very hard and diligently on what we needed to do with unemployment insurance. And the following year, I concluded negotiations with the Douglas administration using the information that we learned in the summer study to come to a conclusion that cut benefits for unemployed workers and raised the amount of money that businesses had to pay into the fund. Those were both very difficult decisions. If you can imagine, people who felt strongly about supporting people out of work did not want to see any cut to benefits. And people in business at the time when we were in the Great Recession surely didn't want to see increased costs around unemployment insurance. So it was a very difficult compromise. We made it, nevertheless, we made that compromise and we moved forward. And this year, businesses across the state are going to see $30 million lower costs with unemployment insurance. And employees that are laid off are going to have greater return of some of those benefits. So that's the way, in my view, that negotiation ought to work and has worked between Republicans and Democrats in previous administrations. This governor doesn't negotiate until after bills are passed, which is why you see this process of the legislature passing a bill, the governor vetoing it, then we do some work, and the bill that is currently going to be passed tomorrow in the House and move on to the Senate combines the budget and the tax bill and moves significantly towards the governor's position. The question will be, is it enough of a movement? We've compromised on the legislature side. We Democrats have compromised. Did we make enough of a compromise to satisfy the administration, and will the governor sign the bill, or will he yet again veto another bill because we didn't get close enough to his position? So that's my assessment of where we've been and where we're at. We will work diligently in the House. I'm on a conference call this afternoon. We will continue to work diligently to try to put together a budget and a tax bill that gets passed in a timely manner.
I apologize, I completely forgot about this meeting. Today is my one day off this week, and I was doing so many things, but does anybody have any other questions that they want to bring up?
Sure.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So I was going to follow, thank you, Dave, for walking through that. So just, it's, we have a House and a Senate. The budget and tax bills originate in the House, and then they come over to the Senate. So on our side of the building, there'll be a second reading, a third and final reading of that budget bill tomorrow. Then the normal process would be that it lies for a day before it messages over, and then it gets introduced in the Senate side. So I think the Senate will be back in on Thursday. It'll be a notice calendar. We could take it. The Senate has been amenable so far to suspending rules so that we can take things up and move through them more quickly rather than one step every day, which takes 4 days altogether if you do it the most sort of methodical way. And so Thursday, Friday, I think the Senate will be looking at that budget, and based on our past performance, I mean, the original budget, we passed 29-0, so that was, Democrats, Republicans, progressives, no independents in the Senate, I think people thought it was a responsible, balanced budget. This includes some compromise in order to try to bring us to a place of ensuring that there is no government shutdown. That's the point of this restructured budget. Provide assurance to everyone who depends on government to be in operation that it will operate without any kind of interruption. I don't think we've ever had in our 240-year history that I'm aware of any kind of interruption. We don't want to see that happen now. We hope that the Senate passes it and the governor signs it. And that leaves some disputes over how taxes and revenues are spent in just one small part of the education budget, and that would be resolved in the coming weeks.
Is there any other questions?
That's a very general discussion. I'd really like some more specifics about where the disputes are and where you might think, or where you think things might go, please.
The dispute is simple. The governor said when the legislative session began that he would not sign a bill where fees or taxes that exist are higher than they are currently, or that he'd accept new fees and taxes. We're at a point where, despite good work by the legislature, we still have a 5.5 cent increase in the non-residential property tax rate for education purposes. I think that equates to around 3%. And that is not something that the governor is willing to accept, as he's kind of said all along. And the House leadership is felt that they've made good steps towards a compromise by having the residential rate return to very close to what the rate was. And it really, at this time in the process, it's primary leadership in the House and the Senate, Democratic leadership, and the governor's team and the governor trying to work something out. And I don't really have a clue what's going to happen. I understand there's going to be an amendment to the bill that we're currently looking at, the budget bill, that is designed to, I guess, offer another solution, a compromise. I don't know all the details. It's coming from Republican leadership. I've heard the administration's on board. I've heard that there's elements that likely will satisfy Democratic leadership, but I'm not sure. It's simple. It's a tax rate. It's that simple, and it's leadership on both sides that have to come to grips with it, I think, and then present things to the rest of the body, and hopefully we can arrive at a solution.
Hi, so I'll just add like my observation on this, and I am actually very proud of the colleagues that I get to spend time with, and how eloquent and how knowledgeable they are, that they can get up and speak on the details of things right off the cuff, and it's really truly a joy to work with some very, very great minds in Vermont. But if you want to boil it down to what's going on, is there's a dispute around whether or not you pay for ongoing costs with a credit card. And some people believe that it's worth putting it on the credit card, and others are, well, we kind of did that last year, and it's just going to blow up next year, when the use of that credit card right now we're at 2.6 cents on the property tax on residential, which some people feel that voters, when they went at town meeting to vote for their school budgets, and the work that the school boards did in conjunction with their communities and their voters, said this is what we want to do and we're okay with this. So the dispute is there. We have extra money, but it's one time, it's a bonus check that's in the general fund. And although there are really, really good one-time uses for one-time money, it is not good fiscal policy to put your mortgage payment on a credit card, because it's next month, the mortgage payment's going to be due again, and so is the credit card bill. So there's the longer term. Next year, we don't want this to continue to blow up and be bigger and bigger. So there's the dispute that's there. What your legislature has done, since in the special session, I think someone asked, what are you doing in the special session? We work very hard to make sure that what we put in place that we're voting on, and the House will finish that tomorrow, is a budget that removed, that took off the table all the things that were agreed upon, so that Vermont would not have to have this unsure financial uncertainty in its near future, July 1. It's also very important, and I know Wall Street watches what we do, and we don't want to have our credit rating being so impacted because of the instability that's going on around this. So the legislature has taken a bill and put aside all the things that were agreed upon, and we're going to hold out the things that are in dispute. Some people feel like we've done too good of a job, that there's nothing left, that people won't want to discuss the things that are in dispute. I don't think that's true. I think Vermonters really want us to continue to work on that second bill, so we're not done. This is only the first piece. We need to get Vermont secured for July 1 and government is open, and then we'll work on the small piece that's in dispute. And there's a lot of good ideas around that right now. Thanks.
Spence Putnam, Weybridge. I want to respond to what Fred said, explaining the governor's position of no new taxes, no new fees. I think that's a very simplistic way of looking at government, and I think it's very short-sighted. We all know that if you have a leak in your roof, you don't need to fix it today, you don't need to fix it next week. You can put it off for a long time, and then you begin to have structural damage, so the cost is a lot higher. Quite often it pays to spend the money up front and get the thing repaired. And the use of this one-time money that Diane referred to to keep taxes down this year could be used for other purposes. And one that I've heard is buying down pension expenses, which over the long run would save $100 million for U.S. Vermont. So it seems to me that just sticking firmly to that idea is not really a good long-term strategy. A couple of other points. The budget that was presented to the governor was passed overwhelmingly in both houses. And so he's putting his judgment against the judgment of most legislators. And a third point is that in regard to the schools, I really think that this is an incursion on local control. 96% of the school budgets in Vermont were passed in their towns this year. And that means that townspeople decided that's what education is worth to them in their towns. By injecting himself into this, the governor is saying that I don't respect the judgment of local voters, A, and B, by using state resources to buy down the cost of education for local voters, removes part of the incentive for voters to be really conscious of the effect of their votes on their own tax rates. So I think there are a lot of issues here that question why the governor did this and whether it really was sound fiscal policy. I don't think it is.
Thank you. Any other comments?
So let's talk about education policy for a minute. This governor, when he was a senator, said it is irresponsible to spend one-time money on ongoing expenses. And you heard a couple of comments regarding that. So why would this governor move away from something that he believes to be true? And I think that there's a reason for that, and I think the reason is that he is part of a national movement to I can't think of a nicer word, to kill public education. His staff put before us last week, he wants to cut over $500 million out of public education, with no implications for reducing the costs in private education. So what we see here is we see a desire and an effort to reduce the money available to public schools. Not just a little bit, but a lot. And by doing that, we encourage people to take their children out of the public schools and put them into private schools. And you see a growing demand in this state and in this nation for public tax dollars to be used to a greater and greater extent to fund private school education. In the long run, and I see this with my granddaughter in Denver, Colorado, you have children of means, like my granddaughter, being able to go to a fantastic elementary school, well-equipped, quality teachers, bright and shiny, wonderful kids. The neighborhood school that my granddaughter could go to is 95% free and reduced price lunch. The school is shabby and underfunded, and it's a terrible situation. I don't think that that's the direction that we ought to go in Vermont, to cut the funding dramatically to public schools and not have any implication whatsoever for the responsibility or cost cutting in private schools, creating a divide between public education and private education. That's not my vision for the future of Vermont, and I sincerely hope it's not the vision of other Vermonters, or Vermonters as a whole, and I believe in the long run it's against our Vermont Constitution.
So I want to follow up on Spence's remarks, because in terms of the school budgets voted this past town meeting day, and how it's been a local decision, what kind of money to develop the budget locally, pass the budget locally. They get collected from around the state, sent to Montpelier, and then enough money is sent back to fund all those. The thing that was, so the governor encouraged towns and school boards to control spending. I think he set a target of about 2.5%. He said, please don't go over that, because that's roughly the rate of inflation. So don't spend more than the economy, the costs are growing. And, but on average, around the state, the budgets came back 1.8% higher. So they beat that target handily. And I think voters and school boards, I think, are to be commended for that kind of good, sound planning in terms of finance. There is a connection, though. You know, when you spend some more, you expect to see your tax bill change, and you're willing to spend a little more in order to improve your school, continue to maintain your school. The problem with taking this one-time money and buying down that tax rate is that you'll spend 1.8% more, you'll see no increase in the bill. So it decouples the basic bargain that we have is if you spend more, you'll pay more. But it's an informed choice. Voters made 96% saying yes on town meeting day. The governor said something, I'd say, which was surprising to me, and that was that he thought that was not an entirely informed vote. People didn't really know what they were going to get out of their town meeting vote on budgets. And although it's a complicated formula and the ups and downs can be difficult to explain in total, I think most people know you spend more, you'll be paying more. The other thing, so to discredit and he also pointed out that the participation rates, it's not 100% voter turnout, so how clearly does that reflect voter intent? But that's true of every election we have, so it seems like a slippery road to go down and say at what level does a vote not really count because an inadequate number of people showed up to participate. The second thing was about 3-4 weeks ago in a discussion, he said that I think I know better, and I represent the people more than the legislature does. And I've never heard a governor make that claim before. And when you look at plan of government in the state of Vermont, it starts with the people as the foundation. Their representatives in Montpelier, the 180 people from around the state. So this is friends, neighbors, community members that we all elect and send to Montpelier to represent us, to say that body should be subservient to the analysis of a single individual elected who's there to execute the work of the legislature, I think stands things a little bit on its head, and it's a worrisome attitude.
I'm the only Republican here, so I'll defend the governor a little bit. Although we don't always agree on everything. In terms of one-time money and using it is not good policy to do it. But previous governors, including Democrats, have done it. It's not a precedent here. And it's politics to talk about it, in my opinion. Should we do it? Ideally not. But it's nothing new. In terms of the governor knowing Vermonters best, the context of that is the number one concern we often hear as legislators when we run is property taxes being too high. And in this instance, the governor is saying, I don't want to support something that raises a rate. It won't necessarily reduce everyone's property taxes. Property tax bills for a lot of people are going to go up. It depends on your community and your circumstances, but it would keep them from going up as much. And I think he feels he's in tune with Vermonters when he says, I think the majority might feel that's not a bad policy to keep our property taxes somewhere. So I don't know that he would say he knows Vermonters more, but I think when it comes to this issue, he feels he has his pulse on things. In terms of informed public on election day, how many of you can explain how your property taxes are determined, especially for education? Good. Very few people can. It's difficult. In Bristol, as an example, we've had 2 budgets. We vote budgets pretty consistently. I think most towns do. We had referendum 2 times now to build, to restore, update Mount Abe, which needs it badly. May not be the perfect example, but the cost was over $30 million, and twice the budget was defeated by pretty resounding votes. Certainly the last time. It's something people understand. They're going to pay for it. It isn't going to go to an ed fund. I think they can understand the issue with the construction budget. When it comes to the general education budget, I'm not so sure. I have no idea where the idea that the governor wants to kill public education. I certainly hope he doesn't. I've never heard those words. I've never necessarily seen a policy direction that suggests that. I think it would be a shame also. It's one of the single things that has made this country great, I believe, is the fact that we educate all our people, all our young people. I'm not aware of anything that the governor has in mind to denigrate public education. His concern, which he has said pretty repeatedly, is that we have less and less kids, and the cost of education continues to rise. And he would like very much to see that paradigm perhaps change, or at least have things slow down. And I think that's more the thrust of his effort. Let's try to keep the cost under control. Our per pupil cost in this state is amongst the highest in the nation. Is that a bad thing? Well, someone's got to be the highest. It doesn't trouble me a lot, but I can understand wanting to slow the momentum down. And I think that's more his thinking rather than an attack on public education itself.
Lois Farnham, Middlebury. 2 requests. One is I would like to see more legislators here, in particular those from Middlebury. And I know there's nobody here today and they have a meeting at the library. Well, that's not the same as seeing you interact with your fellow legislators here, and I hope that message gets across. Number 2, I don't think we only have one Republican here. I think there are others. But it feels like for a budget that overwhelmingly passed before this special session, I feel like our governor has said, this is my ball, and if you want to play, you have to do it this way. And I'm really disappointed in Governor Scott for doing that. I thought politics and legislature was about communications and compromise. And I don't see anybody moving. I think it's Republicans against Democrats, and wherever the independents and progressive fall, that's different. But I think it's time that we work together and got this budget passed. I think everybody needs to give a little, and I think the governor is one of those. He needs to do something other than just say, this is it, and it's my way or the highway. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. So I'll just sort of address your first one. It's pleasant to have as many legislators here. I know that we have a citizen legislature, and people have other jobs in order to support their families. And Mondays are the typical day in the legislature that a lot of people who have their other jobs, they're working, and they're not necessarily able to come regardless of party. It's difficult. I have the pleasure of 3 years ago of not having to go to Burlington half the time, and I'm able to be here, and so I try to make that extra effort when I can, when I'm not in session. But I want to follow up on one of the other things that is also going on, that in some of what's going on, and if you want to call negotiations or discussions. The legislature received a very late suggestion from the governor as of May 1st. We were hoping to leave May 5th. So to have a very large plan saying, I think we should do this. Okay, so let's just take a moment and look at it. He thinks for buying down tax rates, he wants to borrow some of this one-time money. He's calling it borrowing it, credit card, because he believes he had a plan to pay it back. All right, well, we have them in our committee. Tell us what your plan is to be able to pay it back. If you were going to go and ask for a loan or to put something on your credit card, the first thing is you want to be able to see your work. Why do you think you can pay this back? This is a really big deal. We're weighing it against, I think Spence had brought it up, an investment of Vermont taxpayers' money that we know we can get you $100 million in savings. And it's a really good, fiscally sound place to place it. Versus, all right, we'll take a moment, show me your work. And we get nothing. 3 weeks go by. We receive no information. All right, well then show us why you think you can do this. And we get no analysis on it, just because it's a good idea. You guys are being stubborn, you're not listening. Well, we'd love to listen. Show us why you think this was a good idea. And we're really struggling to get the information. It doesn't feel right that I should make that decision to give up $100 million worth known savings for something that cannot be shown that it is actually going to achieve the savings to be able to pay it back. So we're also struggling with that. We do use one-time money for things, but we do want to see that if we use them, we are actually going to put it into place where it's a bridge to savings where we can absolutely see. You don't spend the savings up front and say, I'm going to do this. I want to spend the savings first, when you don't even get to control how the savings happen. It's not feeling like a really good decision regardless. But we're going to continue to work to be able to see if we can find some places of it that might make sense. Thanks.
I believe that gentleman is first. You want to defer to participate.
Good morning, Paul Forlenza from Lincoln. Just a couple of comments. We may have the highest per student cost in the nation, but we also have very high math scores and English scores. So the report I saw was that we rank 6th in the country in math and 8th in the country in English. So we are getting something that's useful for the money. Is what we're spending the right number? I don't know. But I do know that for districts that are cutting their budgets, for instance, where I live, the district around Mount Abe, that means we're losing teachers. So I think in our district, I'm right in saying we've lost one teacher for each of the elementary schools. And so what that means is we now have one teacher teaching multiple grades and trying to deal with the situation where there are fewer aides. And so that puts a lot of pressure on the teachers. One of the things I learned from Dave, which I think is really useful to think about, is we need to get to the point at some point of separating out the cost of true education from the cost of the social services that we're offering at schools. And those social services are really critical. So we ought to separate those out. We ought to look at what those costs are and then decide how we want to fund those. And the last thing I want to say is I really want to thank Dave for all the hard work that he's done, both on the Ways and Means Committee and on the Education Committee. I think he has well represented his district, so thank you, Dave.
Good morning. My name is Ruth Hardy, and I'm from East Middlebury. I wanted to introduce myself for a couple of reasons. One is because I'm running for state senate in Addison County. I'm running for the seat that Claire Eyre is retiring from. But specific to this issue is that I have served for 3 terms on the Addison Central School Board. Well, first on the Middlebury School Board, the ID4 Mary Hogan School Board, and then I co-chaired the ACSD Act 46 committee that merged our school districts, including the Bridport School District, into ACSD. And then for the past 2 years, I've chaired the ACSD Finance Committee. So I've worked a lot with our local school budgets, and I've done a tremendous amount of analysis on our local school budgets. And I wanted to just sort of underscore the work that local school districts are doing to control costs and to make sure that we're providing an excellent education to our children first and foremost. And by doing that, we're looking very specifically at where we can make reductions in our budget and where we can make investments in our children. So just as an example, in ACSD, while we reduced the number of teachers at the high school and the middle school because of declining enrollments there, we actually added a foreign language teacher to our rural elementary schools, including Bridport, so that all of our kids could have foreign language at the elementary level. So we did it in a way that really invested where we needed teachers and where we needed services for our kids, and where we could make reductions based on specific enrollments. Overall, the budget was reduced in ACSD because we were one of the first districts that took advantage of Act 46 and merged our school boards and our school governance systems. We were able to do that. And districts around the state are going to be able to do that as more and more districts are merged. I know Addison Northwest and Northeast are also doing this work, and I'm really proud of the work we're doing at the local level, and it's really disheartening to see our administration and our governor undercut the work we're doing at the local level to serve our children and to serve our taxpayers. I also wanted to say that I spent a lot of time explaining our budget and explaining how our property taxes were calculated and explaining what we were doing. We had standing room only meetings multiple times throughout the process, and we had a very high voter turnout rate for it. So I believe that people did know what they were voting for and why, and supported our school board's efforts to serve our children well and to do so efficiently for our community members. So thank you.
So thanks for your work at the local school board level. It's really remarkable what school boards have done across the state. I also want to commend my district mate Fred for defending a governor who, in my view, has gone off the rails. And I think a bunch of his Republican colleagues would actually agree with me. So, yes, costs are high in schools, property taxes are high. I hear that when I knock on doors, and I imagine all of you experience that when you get your tax bill. So schools are 80% personnel costs. So unlike, making a Chevy or even growing food, we have been able to become an extremely much more productive society than we have in the past, because we've used mechanization and robots to do the work that humans used to do. Now, maybe eventually educational will evolve to that, and we'll have robots teaching our children. In the meantime, we're going to have human beings, teachers, teaching our children, and they deserve a decent wage. So when you have a system that's 80% dependent on personnel and wages, you're going to have costs that you have to deal with. Can we do it more efficiently? Well, I think our committee and the legislature has worked on that over a number of years. Act 46 didn't happen because a governor made an edict. Act 46 happened 6 years ago, the process started, where we recognized in the legislature that the structure of schools was creating, not schools themselves, but the administration and the boards was actually driving up costs and impeding good work in delivering quality education to children. So we had actually two stages of voluntary mergers. Each stage engendered one merger in the state. And then finally we got to Act 46, the third stage of the merger, where we put some teeth into it. And we said, you know, you have to do this or the state will do it for you. And the state plan came out on June 1st. It's on electronically available through the legislative website, or I can send it to you. It's 189 pages long. It's quite thorough and goes through all the school districts in the state in looking for how we can be more efficient in how we structure our school systems and how we have school boards and superintendents throughout the state. That work took 6 years of difficult conversations and hard work on the part of your legislators. Similarly, the special ed piece that we just passed, that we expect over the next 5 years will have similar improvements in how we deliver special education to our children in a way that's more cost effective. In the meantime, school boards and voters across the state did in fact reduce their spending. Kept it down to 1.5, 1.8% of total budgets, and on a per pupil basis, 0.7% increase in costs on a per pupil basis across the state. So school boards and voters are doing their work. We should be celebrating this instead of penalizing it. We should be thanking our school boards and our voters for doing a better job for our children, keeping the high quality standards of our schools in place so that our children have a future, and doing it in a cost-effective manner instead of punishing them.
Dave raises some really good points. The legislature has, there's 4 things that I thought of. Act 46, this year passing a bill that looks at special education for the future, and not only how we fund it, but more importantly, how it's delivered. There was also, I forget what bill it was in, but there's a panel or a study committee to talk about adult-student ratios that passed this year that hopefully will address the number of adults we have per kid in school. And the unions have agreed to sit down with the administration, I should say the state really, to talk about the health insurance contract. If you recall, that was a big issue last year, but the unions, I don't know what motivated them, but they're willing to talk about negotiating their health insurance with the state of Vermont rather than on a district-to-district basis. So I think some very good things are happening. I voted for all those things that came out of Dave's committee. I think it's good stuff. I was a school board member for years. I appreciate the process, and I know adults work very hard on that. One thing about the budget, I voted for the budget last year, I voted for the budget this year. The reason why the governor vetoes the budget isn't because he doesn't like the budget. But if we're going to use one-time money, it has to come from the budget. So if you approve a budget, you don't have the dollars, I guess, to look at his achievement of the goal that he has, which is no increase in fees and taxes. That's why he vetoed the budget. I think he would have signed it if it weren't for that strategy type situation. Finally, I don't know that I talk about it a little bit. Why is the governor being so persnickety and really behaving in a fashion like he doesn't want to meet people in the middle on taxes, where it's no increase in fees or taxes, period, or or apparently there's a line drawn in the sand. And I think, quite frankly, that a lot of it has to do with the fact that he said repeatedly for a few years he wouldn't sign any bills on gun legislation. And he broke his promise. He had an epiphany. He felt with what happened down in Fairhaven in particular that perhaps that stance wasn't the correct stance. It took a lot of courage for him to change something which is very much a Republican Party type thing. And if anyone saw the news and what went on, where he actually went out in the public on the front lawn to sign the bill, that also took a lot of courage. But he broke his word in a sense. I don't think he wants to do that again. And I think, quite frankly, psychologically, my thinking, he hasn't said it, my thinking, that's another reason why this, I said this, I'm not going to sign a bill with new fees and taxes. I think that's another reason why he's going down that road, quite frankly. I don't think he wants to break his word twice.
So I can respect how important a person's word is, and it's one of the first things that you learn as a legislator is that there is nothing as important as keeping your word. That's all you have. That's all that holds us all together is that alone. So you have to be very, very careful when you make a promise, that it can be very difficult. And when things change, when you see information or over time things evolve and change, you have to be able to say what I believed yesterday, but there are things that are different, and we need to, for the good of the state and everything that's right, to move in this direction. And we've seen this governor do that, like Fred had just, Representative Baser just articulated on the gun issue. I am not willing, and have not been, to sacrifice the entire state of Vermont's government funding system for something that's not true. I know I believe that his promise is there, what he's saying, but even within his plan, when we've cursorily looked at it, our staff and analysis, half of Vermont's property taxes would go up anyway. He is talking about an average state rate, which we haven't gotten to the bottom yet. So our cursory analysis is that 127 towns in Vermont would see increased property taxes. And there's a lot of other reasons. So I am very hopeful that he can come to the same terms and not put Vermont on that risky path of a shutdown July 1 for a promise that's not able to be made. The legislature has put a bill, H13, that puts us on a path of not having a shutdown and everything runs, and still allowing the continued work around the disputed area. I think that we've hit the right tone, and we're saying we're going to continue to work with you on these things, but we are not going to allow Vermont to be shut down.
Ed Payne, Bridport. The elephant in the room, and I don't mean the Republican elephant or the Democratic donkey or whatever, is we're spending too damn much. And we had Governor Douglas try to address the issue. It didn't get addressed. It hasn't been addressed. This consolidation hasn't been addressed. You say 80% of the cost of education is personnel, and that isn't just teachers. Keith Hall, he's now passed, good friend of mine, had been a superintendent up in Bristol. I don't know what, I can't remember the district, but it was his thought, and he considered it, is that all we need is one superintendent for the whole of Addison County. and as other people have put forth. Has anybody looked at that 147 million savings report that came out here a couple of years ago, or is that got buried in the archives and nobody even looked at it? We have, you just saw Keurig laying off 30, 50 people to streamline. We gotta streamline. That means we are gonna lose, some supervisory personnel. We are gonna have to have larger classrooms, and we are gonna have to rethink our delivery of special education, and that we aren't doing. We're just scratching the surface, and we really need to take a hard look at it. When your student population continuously shrinks, you've got to do some, what they call RIF, reduction in force. And we aren't getting there. I don't know why. There doesn't seem to be a willingness. I have thoughts, but I wouldn't want to accuse the teachers union of running the legislature, but I believe they do. And I think instead of bashing the governor, and I don't know that I agree with him in the way he's approached it, but he's got the right idea.
So I'm sure I'll forget some of the points you made, but I'll try to address them. First, we have heard from time to time, ever since I've been in the legislature, that we're spending too much on education. And so when we did Act 46, we commissioned what's called an adequacy study. Are we spending the right amount on education? Are we spending not enough or too much? A national outfit called PICUS, who's done these kinds of studies in over 20 states, undertook that process for Vermont, and they said in K-12, regular K-12 education, we spend about the right amount of money. Let me repeat that. In the regular K-12 education, we spend about the right amount of money. We spend $30 million too much in administration, and we spend $140 million too much in special ed, which I think is the number you were referring to when you mentioned $140 million. So that led us to feel more strongly that Act 46 was in fact the right process to go down, because we could see some reduction in that $30 million of spending in administration deemed to be too much. And in fact, we have seen, especially where there's been a reduction of superintendents. We have two instances in the state where we've had two supervisory unions combine into one superintendent, and that has saved over $1 million in each circumstance. And there have been discussions, there are discussions underway in Addison County right now is to have one superintendent for the entire county, and maybe including the tech center, which in some ways would solve a lot of problems. I have some concerns about a supervisory union that large, but it's certainly worth a conversation, and certainly would save money, and certainly may open opportunities for students to take advantage of the Career Technical Center. And we know that that's one area where we have to move forward in, is we don't have enough plumbers and electricians. We have good jobs available in those areas right now, and we don't have enough pupils in the pipeline. So we're moving in those directions. The $140 million in special ed led us to a second year of process, and that was where we put out a bid for a contract to look at the funding system, and UVM undertook that study, and they said with changes in how we deliver special education, we could in fact save between $70 and $80 million. And so that's not as robust as what Picus and Associates felt like we were spending too much of, but if we can save $70 or $80 million and at the same time deliver better services to our children, that's a road we want to go down. So that's what led to the development of this special ed bill that we just passed. We had district management group, a group out of Harvard, look at delivering best practices. Excuse me. And they found that we could in fact do a better job delivering special ed services to our children and save money at the same time. Concurrently, this year we are seeing the first big influx of students into our schools from the opiate crisis. So we have in fact reduced teaching staff across the state over the last several years by 500 teachers. We've hired about 100 staff members, behavior specialists, social workers, psychologists, guidance people, because we have seen a much larger increase in our schools of children with mental health issues and opiate issues. And if we're going to educate these children, we have to deal with these issues. We don't fund our mental health system adequately enough, so these problems are left to the schools. When kids walk through those doors into our schools, our school boards and our teachers are doing their very best to try to help those students overcome these mental health issues and addiction issues to be able to be successful students. And where we have not done that in this country, we have seen some absolutely horrific problems where students with mental health have come in and wreaked havoc in our schools. We don't want that to be happening in Vermont, and so I think we're doing the right things in that regard. We are working in the right direction in our schools. Like I said earlier, we should applaud this and move forward.
So I think we've talked about this topic quite a bit. I guess there's one more comment, and maybe we can move to another topic.
Well, I was going to push that ball, actually, because my understanding is that in the special session, several bills were revived that died in the regular session. So I wonder if someone could give us a quick summary of some of the other issues that have been taken up in the special session and where those things lie at this point.
Oh, I'm trying to look it up.
Representative Langford will get the facts. And the context is, so there was when we came back, and we actually, a special session is a new session. You know, you are starting from scratch. You set up rules to run the House, run the Senate, and how the two work together. And as part of that whole framing up of how we were going to have the goal was as brief as possible, a productive session to resolve really the budget crisis that we could all see coming, you know, the conflict as we were adjourning. And so the Senate has, for its side, said we're not introducing any new bills. We're just going to bills that literally the clock ran out while they were sent to the House, could not be taken up because the gavel came down and we were done. That's all we were sending over. And that was, I think, that was the understanding as I understood it between the two bodies as we came back. I think the House has actually been willing to bring up and discuss more bills than just those that sort of died as the clock struck 12 back on May 12th, whatever it was. But I don't think my understanding is that there's not an expectation that extra bills will be discussed. We're going to stick to really the most compact set of bills, the chief amongst which are the tax and the budget bill, and then a couple other things. I think a total of 6, 3 House, 3 Senate, that They were on their way to likely passage, but we literally, the session adjourned. So I think you may hear about more bills that I think will likely be taken up and moved through the whole process.
So I can't find the actual list, but I'm still looking. We need better broadband. So yeah, the House, you're right, Senator, we have taken up some bills that were actually very close to being finished when we left, when we gavelled out on May 12th. And those bills, and weigh in others, there's things like the fare repair bill, which was something that people really, really wanted, that was very close, and was able to come to conclusion in a committee of conference that we could get through. And I'm trying to think of what the other ones. I've been very much into my world of the budget, but have been paying attention, and I'll sit down and I'll see if I can find them before I leave. But I do believe there are 6.
What, liquor and lottery?
Liquor and lottery combination. They were things that were so ready to be done that we were just glad that we had this opportunity to push them over the finish line. And so they're very non-controversial and things that we wanted to get finished.
So does anybody else have a question for discussion?
I just want to say that my name is Terry Basic. I'm in Lincoln. That as a voter, I vote for my reps and for the senators to represent me and or us. When they work hard to develop bills and resolutions and a budget, that I don't understand how the governor can't respect that. I don't understand what the function of our representatives and our senators if the governor is not going to respect and follow through with it, or at least work with it. So I'm just a little disillusioned. I mean, I want to support people I know that are running for office, and I'm thinking, why would they want to do this if they can't get anything handled? So so I'm hoping the Republicans who have voted for this budget keep firm with that and don't override and override the governor's veto.
I would like to think that the vote that we had when we passed the budget, because this was something that should be reminded that this isn't a Democrat-Republican piece. It was Democrats, Republicans, progressives, and independents all working together to craft a bill and funding of state that 117 to 14 in the House and 29 to 0 in the Senate. You'll hear us saying that means that we had overwhelming consensus that we were doing the right thing. It's not lost that this particular engagement, I think our current administration, we're not picking on, but this is unprecedented for the lack of engagement, and that's what we're used to is your representatives and senators and even people who work in the administration, is that when there's an idea or something that wants to move forward, we're used to working together with the administration as equal partners. We are the equal branch of government, getting to the point where when it's finally May, you've come to compromises along the way and you listen to each other, and when it makes sense, you incorporate it. But I would not expect any side of any discussion to just take someone's word for something or not engage and say, I want this, without saying, I would like this, and this is how it could be done, and this is how it would be made better. So I think we're struggling a little bit with that. The type of administration, that the way that they're engaging with us or not engaging, and that's why we are where we are today, it being June 4th, and we're still not finished. And we'll be back there another week. So hopefully tomorrow we pass the budget. It's going to go over to the House. If it follows the natural protocol that it's supposed to, it will take 4 days. And then we'll continue to have to work on that other piece. We are not finished once this budget passes, and you might want to schedule another wrap-up. for the legislature, because if H13 gets vetoed also, we are in an extraordinarily interesting and difficult, perplexing time for Vermont. And once again, I'll just say thank you for sending me there.
Representative Lanford referred to it, and so I was going to talk about the engagement issue, which has been tricky. But I grew up in a non-political household. First person I know of in my family in generations to run for any kind of office. But everyone was involved in community service, so I think that's actually why I ended up going to a citizen legislature. And someone said, well, did you get any political lessons at home? And I said, well, I don't remember any in particular. But one of those lessons was from my mother, and she said, you never make yourself look any bigger by trying to make someone else look smaller. And I think that has been something that has stuck with me all my life. And so I'm in a very uncomfortable position when we're in these meetings talking critically about the performance of the administration. And, I want to depersonalize it. But it is an uncomfortable thing, I think, for everyone in this room, because I think if I think of the tenor of this conversation this morning, everyone is respectful, polite, well-informed. We're hearing, back and forth between two ways of looking at things, and I'm proud of the way we're conducting ourselves. And even so, I have to come back to the performance. We all have a job to do in Montpelier, including the administration. So literally, as we are about to have the third and final reading of our budget, the administration came to the Senate the legislature on May 1st and gave us a roughly $400 million savings plan for education, and said that they were going to use some of the savings from that plan to pay off this $55 million loan. So it was, it's an extraordinary thing to be on the cusp of voting the final budget. It's been bipartisan all the way along, and then to have a $400 million plan presented with very little data behind it to argue its case, to let you know that it's sound fiscal management. And so we need respectful, engaged partners all the way along in the process. And that involves, the way I've seen it in the 10 years I've been there, is that administration, through members of their own party or other means, bring ideas to the legislature. And that means you need them in black and white, in writing, between the four corners of a page, draft legislation. You need to put your work on the table, and then we work through it together. And that's how we create our best product in the end. No one has an exclusive claim on being correct. We know that there's Vermonters with all sorts of points of view. We try to distill that all down into a reasonable compromise, do the best we can, move forward. And I think the biggest challenge we've had is that we haven't had the administration participate in that way of developing a final bill. And that's why we're in a situation that, as best I know, is entirely unique. 3 budgets have been vetoed in the state's history, and this governor's vetoed 2, and if he vetoes the one we're about to pass, it'll be 3. And we've never had that kind of thing. And I'll say that the thing that worries me a little is it's fraying nerves, and it worries me a little that it sounds occasionally a little more like what we hear out of Washington, D.C. than I've ever heard in my life in Vermont. And I hope we move through this process, everyone learns, and we have no repeat of it in the coming sessions.
John Ball from Vermont, of course, Addison. I just would like to say a special thank you to all the legislators here and the ones that aren't here for the job they've been doing in Montpelier for we the people. We have a very unique situation here in that this legislative breakfast is one of the few venues that I know of, even in the country, where our legislators come and can be addressed and speak to us on a personal level sometimes, is very special. I also want to reiterate what Paul said about Dave Sharp. Dave has been a consistent attender of this legislative breakfast ever since he's been in Montpelier. I know, and we all know how hard he's worked up there. Even those who don't always agree with him, I think will agree that he is a hard, conscientious, thoughtful worker in Montpelier. And I want to say again, thank you very much, David. It's been a pleasure having you in the legislature and getting to know you on a personal basis as well. We're going to have a new slate of legislators in the coming session. I hope that the present legislators will express to the new people that come in just how important this legislative breakfast is. It's one of the last chances we have of real democracy working where we the people can be heard by those who govern. Thank you.
So, in closing, I'd just like to address the legislators for the dairy businesses around. And we just saw on the news that there was a dumping of sewage, or whatever you want to call it, in Burlington. It's been in Brandon. And farmers are working with manure management and putting lots of money in that they don't have to increase the lake, so that the lake is good for our people. And so I'm asking the legislators, what is going to happen with the municipalities that are dumping into the lake? And are the farmers always going to get blamed for it? Take it. Sure.
They're totally two different subjects. So that's, it's like, farmers are most are doing the right thing and are working the nutrient management program, which is another really good reason to support this current budget without fear. It does help a great deal of financial support for even in the milk pricing and that without going too far. I will leave a couple copies of this. This is sort of the 2-page back in front of what the budget was, which is really nice. This shows you what we did, and then there's one change in the current one is that we took the teacher's retirement out and put it over to the side for continued negotiation. But everything else in here is in H13 plus a few things from the tax bill. Sewer. Yes, we need to pass a budget so we can also help our municipalities with their septic systems. It is an issue for health purposes. It produces about 2% of the phosphorus issue, so it's not a phosphorus issue with the septic, but it is an icky situation and a health issue when Otter Creek is considered one of the impaired waterways. It needs work, and work requires funding to actually get it done. Farmers are working across the state, as we just said. I'm not too sure, Cheryl, where you want to go on that. I'd like to see us have left here, and I think the Senator will speak to this, a permanent long-term funding source for our lake and to help the farming communities. You mentioned that they're putting a lot of their money into this. Yes, but so is the state is right there next to them, if not 50% or more, helping them pay for those upgrades that they need to do. It's a serious problem with water, and I'm going to let our Senator fill us in.
So I think, Cheryl, you might be referring to combined sewer overflows, or they refer to CSO events. So in a nutshell, we have wastewater treatment plants, and many of them, the plumbing in the town is that it takes stormwater plus sewer water. They use the same pipes and they run to the plant, the wastewater treatment plant. When we get heavy rain events, so much water comes to that plant that it threatens to overwhelm the system. And So they are designed, when too much water arrives, the water is diverted. It doesn't get put through the wastewater treatment plant, and it's diverted into the waterway. So, and that's for engineering reasons, in order to not basically wreck that wastewater treatment plant. That design was popular. That's the way things were being built 50, 60, 70 years ago. In that same time period, since they were constructed, two things have happened. One, a lot of them need upgrades because they are that old. And secondly, rain, we're getting rain in larger doses in shorter periods of time. If you look at distribution maps of how much rain comes how fast. So these systems that only might have had a combined sewer overflow once a year or twice a year are now having them much more routinely than anyone would like. By way of reassurance, I don't know this way reassuring, they are highly diluted. There is so much stormwater in there that when you think of a large manure spreader out spreading in the field, it would be like putting between 1 and 2 gallons of septage, so sewer water, into that spreader, 1 or 2 gallons in a 7,000 gallon tank, and then topping the rest off with water. So although the gallon counts are very high, the amount of septic in that water is relatively low. Now, it's still not a good thing. No one wants that kind of septic water flowing into places that they might want to go swimming. And so coming back to how does this get fixed, the largest area of expense in the 20-year Clean Water Plan is municipal investment. And it includes bonds for upgrades to stormwater systems, sewer systems, and wastewater treatment plants. And so I think there are, I think in the coming 3-5 years, we'll see many towns taking out bonds to do additional work and help reduce the frequency and severity of those combined sewer overflows.
Are there any other questions on anything after I drop this bomb? Do you want to respond again, Diane? Or?
No, I was just going to leave some.
All right. So if not, I guess we're ready to. Right now, we're not going to have another breakfast until September, unless, as Diane points out, we really need to have one. And I think the Farm Bureau would be definitely open to hosting another one. So. Yeah, how many people would like to see an additional one if, okay, all right. So thank you all for attending, and look at the newspaper to see if there's going to be another one, okay?